Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into the Texans wide receiver room. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. You guys know that I love the Texans offense. And I think this is going to be a very important question to answer in fantasy this year. And depending on who you get and who ends up performing could determine a lot of fantasy leagues out there. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to kick off with Nico Collins. He finished as wide receiver 9 last year. He was very productive. He did that in 15 games. Very high upside wide receiver. He was very productive, and he was like either picked up off the waiver wire or very end of the draft last year. So he was an excellent value. Overall, you see his overall numbers, 80 for almost 1,308. And yeah, so I mentioned he missed the 2 games, and he also did just sign an extension with the team. So, as the saying goes, follow the money. And, so I think he's the one that got paid. He's the one that's going to be the number one in the offense, I think most of us expect. But, there are a lot of mouths to feed. So what do you think on Nico Collins?
Yeah, so Nico is kind of the definition of a third-year breakout. Like his first 2 years, he averaged only like 460 yards per season. But I think that is really tied to, CJ Stroud having an awesome campaign. And, the underlying metrics of Nico Collins have always been solid. So it's kind of been waiting to happen. So it was really fun to watch this year. And I think, as the offseason has gone along, I've kind of changed my tune on Nico Collins quite a bit. I know earlier on I was all just, I'm going to wait, I'm going to get Dell, that's all I'm going to do. But now I'm kind of at the point where the more research I do into Nico, I think I'm just going to pay to play with him. Like, he's an elite wide receiver. He wins against all coverages. He's the true X. He has like the second highest ADOT, only behind Tyreek Hill. He's great yards after the catch. Like he can really do everything. And if I'm going to have AJ Brown as my wide receiver 6 right now, and he's got, a true competition with Devontae Smith, I don't know why I've been pushing Nico down. So I think he is someone that's climbing up my boards and who I'm, going to be targeting pretty heavily this year.
Yeah, and I don't know that I agree on the comp to AJ Brown. I mean, AJ Brown is the clear alpha there.
Sure.
Smith
yeah,
is
of
his
course.
complement.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 of them, right? It's not like there's a third receiver in the mix that the quarterback
You
also
don't
very
love
much likes.
You're not in the Johnny Wilson hype train yet?
No, I don't even know who that is. No, but I understand pushing Nico down a little bit. And my reservations on Nico, obviously, I love him as a player, right? He was awesome last year. When he was the only game in town, too, it wasn't like he got shut down. He was just having massive games with big target shares. But my concern, obviously, is when you add Stefon Diggs to an already solid wide receiver duo, it's just where are all the targets going to come from? They're going to have to majorly increase their volume to keep these guys all viable all the time. And so that concerns me a little bit. And as the X receiver, maybe he gets lost in the fold a little bit. If he never is coming inside, they roll coverage, they bracket him, and then all of a sudden, Tank and Diggs are just open all game, and Nico goes, 3 for 50 type of games, and so I'm a little worried about that. And, he is going pretty early, I mean, he's going as wide receiver, 15, 16 in some leagues. And you see him in Superflex leagues in the 4th round sometimes, mainly in the 5th round, but that's really high for a player that, potentially has a little bit of volume concerns. So, just the negative side. He's obviously a very, very good player. He's going to be a locked in starter every week. The offense is just through the roof. I think all of these guys in 3 wide receiver leagues are likely to be starters any given week. So, but yeah, so love Nico Collins. Just, I'm not getting crazy. I still do have him ranked as wide receiver 18. So I haven't pushed him up ahead of Deebo Samuel or ahead of DJ Moore or anything like that. Because I have a little more confidence that those guys are going to be on the top of Deebo Samuel obviously is a little bit more of a gadget player, but doesn't have these same volume concerns because he's going to get the ball on the ground too. And, also on DJ Moore, you guys know I just haven't been able to quit DJ Moore kind of ever. So I think DJ Moore has a clearer path to being the the top option on his team than Nico. So,
I'm not
and
sure
that's because go ahead.
I'm not sure I agree with that with DJ Moore because I think that's also a three-headed monster, and I'm not getting crazy to the point where I'm pushing Nico above like Chris Olave, for example. But I don't know. The more I look into him, and the more I think that CJ Stroud has 5,000 yard upside this season, like I just want to attack his what I see as his number one target.
Yeah, and I think that's fair on the Bears offense, but I personally I understand how good Rome Odunze is. I don't think he's going to be as big of a threat as Tank Dell. And the other thing is Rome Odunze is going to be playing on the outside and Keenan in the slot. So there's going to be DJ Moore with the volume on the outside, Keenan Allen with the volume in the slot, and I just don't think that Rome Odunze presents the same volume concerns that Tank Dell does. And
That's
that's
fair.
reflected in ADP.
Yeah,
Like those
yeah,
two aren't even close in ADP. So that's my thought on Nico. That's why I have him still below DJ Moore in my rankings. But also, another reason why I still have him at 18 is I'm not 100% sure that Nico is going to be the one over Stefon Diggs. I mean, Diggs has been an elite receiver in the league for years now. And, he finished as wide receiver 10 last season, despite kind of falling apart at the end of the year and having the offense completely turn away from him. But he still had 107 receptions, 1,180 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I mean, that's 27 more receptions over the season than Nico had. And that's even when Nico had played a lot of games without Tank Dell, and was racking up the catches and yardage when he was the only game in town. So, I do think that there's like I said with Nico, it's the volume concern. I think that Diggs might be the highest targeted player on this offense. And if that's the case, then you're probably going to have wished that you picked Diggs over Nico when it comes down to it at the end of the year. But I do have Diggs behind Nico right now at 20. But Diggs is somebody that I like drafting. If I can get him in the fifth and maybe end of fifth, early sixth round of Superflex leagues, this is somebody that I'm very happy to get as my third wide receiver, especially if I'm still waiting to fill that wide receiver spot at that point. I definitely really like to get him as my third. I think that there's upside here, obviously, because the offense is going to be really good. But if he gets a 25% target share on an offense that might throw it 35, 36 times a game, he's going to be up at 9 targets a game. And I think that that's just a really valuable role and something that Stefon Diggs can turn into a lot of production.
yeah. I mean, I'm kind of on the opposite page as you. I'm not convinced that Stefon Diggs is going to be the number two in this offense, to be frank. Maybe I'm soured on him just because I picked him so early last year and he had such a disappointing second half. But, a lot of that probably had to do with Joe Brady taking over. But, 2 years ago, he had the same thing, right? Where he kind of fell off in the second half as well. He's only 30 years old. His underlying metrics last year were still solid, not as good as they've been throughout the career. But I see him as kind of this 1 year rental while they're in win now mode and not necessarily part of the future. And, I could picture him playing in the slot more than Tank Dell, to be honest. And in that case, him being off the field in 2 wide receiver sets. He's someone that I've been avoiding and will continue to avoid. And if he emerges as the number one target on the team and I didn't have him, then, so be it. But there are other guys around, his ADP, like George Pickens or Malik Neighbors, who I know who are the most talented wide receivers on their offense and will be the focal point with less competition. So at that ADP, that's the direction I'm going to be going in over Stephon
Malik
Diggs.
Neighbors, did I hear?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You're going to take Malik Neighbors ahead of Stefon Diggs? Yeah, see, I just am not on the Malik Neighbors train, man. I don't get that at all.
All right, well,
He's
let's
on a
make
bad
a
offense
we'll make a $5 bet right now on Neighbors versus Diggs.
versus Diggs. Oh, I'm in on that. I will record that right after this. Right after this call.
I love it.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good one too because I think Neighbors is getting pushed to the top 20, and I have Diggs at 20. So I also don't know where all of this is coming from. That Diggs is going to be more competing with Tank Dell than he is with Nico Collins. I've been hearing that more and more, and I don't get it. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. So I think Tank is getting pushed up because he's got this very good rapport with CJ Stroud, but at some point, right, like Diggs is a premier receiver in the league. Like we can't just discount how good Stefon Diggs is. And that didn't just like go away overnight. So I'm not buying into this whole like, Diggs versus Tank Dell thing. I know that there are some rankers, there's some videos out there talking about how they have Dell ranked ahead of Diggs too, and I personally don't buy it, so I won't be doing that. You guys saw in the rankings, right? We had Nico at 18 and Diggs at 20, and then my rankings, you'll see when the second set of wide receiver ranking comes out, I have Dell at 32. Like I don't have it all that close between Dell and the other two, so. We've started to talk about him quite a bit now, so let's transition over to Tank Dell here. So he finished as wide receiver 38 last season, but that was because he only played in 11 games, right? He had 12.9 PPR points per game. That was 16th best amongst receivers, and that's kind of what it felt like when you owned him and he was on the field, right? That you had a solid mid-tier RB2, wide receiver 2. And so he had 15.1 yards per reception. So he was used down the field a lot. It was not just slot work. It was not just at the line of scrimmage. He was very effective in the 2-minute drill and the 4-minute drill. CJ Stroud relied on him in a big way to help him in those high pressure situations. And you could just see the rapport when he was on the field, right? I mean, we were talking in week 5, week 6, week 7, like, hey, is Tank Dell the wide receiver that you want on the Texans over Nico Collins? Because the rapport was that clear in those situations. So, that discussion was being had. Obviously, he got hurt and didn't really make it back. And Nico was like really turned into a high level player. So I don't think we're going to have those same questions this year. I think the offense is going to try to center on Nico in the way that it was when it was running well at the end of the year, and then have Tank Dell supplement back in and reestablish his role in the slot. And maybe he plays outside on 2 wide receiver sets, but I don't expect that. So I expect Tank to be playing 75% of the targets this year.
Yeah, I don't get it with the slot thing with you and Tank Dell being a slot guy. He played like 20% of his snaps in the slot last year. Like he's an outside wide receiver in every category minus size. Like he's just, I don't know. I think he's just kind of this like weird outlier and is such a talented route runner that could face off against all these different styles of coverages. And I don't know. I'm kind of one of those weird rankers that has him ahead of Stefon Diggs now too. And if I'm on the clock, I'm taking the bet on, the second year player. But again, that could backfire. But I don't know. I just see the future of this team in Stroud, Nico, and Dell, and I think we're going to see that on the field this year.
Yeah, and I'm not like I want to be clear. I'm not the one pigeonholing him in the slot. The Texans did, right? Like they set up their team. Like, and Diggs will go in there too. So I'm not saying he's going to play all his snaps, but if you think he's only going to be playing 20% of his snaps in the slot after they brought in Diggs, like I would be shocked. I don't want to tell you that you're going to be wrong because maybe I will eat my words on that, but I would be shocked if he's only 20% in the slot. And when you only have 2 wide receivers and you have a very productive tight end, you don't have to go in there as much. And I understand he's good on the outside. So I don't want you to say I'm the one pigeonholing him in the slot. Like the Texans did that with their personnel. And so, he can win in there too, but I do expect, he's going to be 40-50% in the slot. Diggs will be 25 to 30% in the slot, and Dell's not going to play on third down or in 2 wide receiver sets. Now I will say I don't expect the Texans to run very many 2 wide receiver sets. Why would they ever do that when they have this wide receiver trio? The only time I could see that is maybe like on the goal line, right? They don't have the personnel to run 12, so maybe they run 21 personnel on the goal line, 2 tight ends, and they're not going to be running 2 running backs ever. So I don't know. I think they're going to be in a lot of 11 personnel personally, and so it'll keep him on the field. But like I do think that his role is going to shift towards being a 50% slot player because of the personnel.
And that's fair too.
Yeah. So I mean, do you agree with that, or do you think that Diggs is going to be the one that gets put into the slot?
To be honest, I don't think it's going to be as low as 20% as it was last year, but I do think that Diggs will have a slightly higher slot snap percentage than Tank Dell.
Okay, so you think it's going to be 40 and 40 basically,
I
and
think
then
they're
the
going to
other
move
40 will
around
be outside?
a lot. Yeah, I think they're going to move around quite a bit too.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, and so if they do that, so say Diggs is the one playing in the slot about the same amount as Tank Dell, is that really going to be a bad thing for Diggs or a bad thing for Dell?
No, I'm not.
Or
I'm not making a point either way that that's a bad thing for fantasy. I'm just the narrative that it sounded like you were presenting was he was kind of just this like slot guy, whereas last year he was much more of an outside
oh,
receiver.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm not making the point that he's just a slot guy. No, I said
Okay.
I said 15 yards per reception, and he was relied heavily
That's a
on.
that's a
He
big.
was relied heavily down the field in 2 and 4 minute drills. I mean, he was literally the one that was getting open down the field in the high pressure situations. I mean, you think about the game where Stroud had like a minute and 20 seconds, and Dell had 60 yards and a touchdown on that drive on like 3 catches or whatever it was to win the game.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not saying he's only a slot receiver. I'm saying this year he's going to be playing significantly more in the slot because that's what the personnel is going to dictate here. But either way, I think the point too. I think that was a good discussion on Tank Dell, and hopefully you're still with us. Thinking about these things as well, because I think either way, all of these guys are very good fantasy picks this year. I don't think any of these guys are going to be a bust. I think the offense is going to throw a lot. I think they're all going to be on the field a lot. And so I think overall you should be trying to target a Texans wide receiver. If you don't get Diggs or Nico up front, Tank Dell is an excellent target a round or two later. And like Matt said, he has Tank just straight up ranked over Diggs. So he's not going to have any Diggs in that earlier part of the draft. And I think there are people that intentionally avoid the early two to get Tank Dell because they think that that's, where the value presents itself. And that's a very fair thing to do as well. So if you want Tank to be your target, I do think, even though I have him ranked the lowest, I do think he's going to be on the field, and I do expect him to be productive this season.
Love it.
All right. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.